Good afternoon and welcome to Slow Art Friday. My name is Christy McMillan. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Asheville Art Museum. And I'm joined today by Dunn and Ralinda Lurie, two touring docents here at the museum who will be facilitating today's program. Each Friday at 12 p.m., docents lead virtual interactive conversations about a few artworks in our collection or special exhibitions. The goal is simple: slow down, discover the joy of looking at art, and talk about the experience with others. For today's program, Kay and Ralinda will lead us in an interactive conversation about three works in our collection. We'll spend about 15 minutes or so with each one. Kay and Ralinda will allow us time to look at each work on our own, slowly, before leading a conversation with questions. As participants, we encourage you to engage in dialogue with Kay, myself, and each other throughout the hour. Probably noticed as you got logged in that your microphones and video were muted by default. We invite you to turn on your video at any time. It's always better to talk to a person rather than a box or a name. And in just a moment, I'll make it so that you can unmute your microphones as well. Choose a quiet room and close the door. Please silence any alerts from nearby devices, as they can be very distracting during the program, and I am going to do the same myself right now. If you do choose to turn on your video, try not to sit in front of a window, lamp, or other strong source of light or movement, as it makes it difficult to see you. Use headphones and microphone for best sound quality. While you can log on using a smartphone, we recommend using a desktop, laptop, or tablet in order to see slides, meeting tools, and images on a larger screen. Make sure that your screen name includes your first name and last initial, or first name and last name, again, so that we know who we're talking to throughout the program. In order to ask questions or make comments, we invite you just to unmute your microphone when Kay or Ralinda ask for questions or comments. It's the easiest way to participate. You can also type any questions or comments that you have into the chat box. A third way to participate is to raise your hand in the participant sidebar, and I will call on you and ask you to unmute your microphone. Just so that you know, typing in the chat box and raising your hand in the participant sidebar can delay your participation in the program, as sometimes it takes a while to get to all of the queued up comments. But we do welcome you again. Just the easiest and best way to participate is to unmute your microphone when Kay, Ralinda, or I ask for questions or comments. Finally, we are recording. If you prefer not to be recorded, make sure that your video and audio remain muted and use the chat box to submit questions or comments. At this point, I'm going to make it so that folks can unmute themselves. Please do leave your microphone muted unless you're actively asking a question or making a comment. Do you have any questions before we get started? Hello, all my familiar faces over here and some new ones as well. Okay, Kay and Ralinda, what will we be talking about today?
Well, welcome everyone to Slow Art Friday. I'm Ralinda Lurie, a touring docent with the Asheville Art Museum. And for the next hour, my fellow touring docent, Kay Dunn, and I, along with all of you, will be exploring repetition in art. Repetition in art. Repetition in art. Well, that was pointlessly repetitious, wasn't it? But what about repetition in art? Artists have used repetition since the beginning of art. Repetition can be seen in the cave paintings in Argentina's Cueva de los Manos from around 13,000 years ago, and in Michelangelo's 14th century fresco across the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, as well as in the decorative tiles covering buildings throughout the Islamic world. So what is repetition in art? Repetition is defined as repeating a single element many times. Is that the same as pattern? Well, in the art world, pattern is the repetition of a combination of elements, such as shapes, lines, or colors. The four works of art that Kay and I have chosen for our conversation today all demonstrate repetition and pattern. What we're about to think and talk about is why. What do we see? We use pattern recognition every day to help us understand and navigate the world. Why did each of these artists employ repetition as an element of their design? How does it influence our response to these abstract pieces? Can repetition and pattern affect what our eyes see and defy what our brain is telling us? And what about color? What role does it play in the repeating images? Let's see what we can find out. Kay and I will take turns facilitating the conversation this afternoon. Kay, do you want to get us started with the first artwork, please?
Sure. All right. Thank you, Ralinda. All right, let's take just a moment to quietly look at this first artwork. Okay, what's going on in this artwork?
Well, I see lemons, and they're obviously, as we were just talking about color and repetition, the lemons are repeated and the color is very different in the background as well as in the lemon. Normally you think of a lemon as being yellow, so my eye is drawn to the one in the top right, the square with the black background with the yellow lemon, but it's very interesting.
Okay, now you said that you see lemons. What specifically about these objects makes you say that they're lemons?
I guess mainly the shape, and the first one, again, because it was yellow, looks to me to be a lemon, and as such the others appear to be the same shape of the same objects.
Okay, so you're seeing a repeated shape, repetition in the shape. Okay. What else? What more can we find?
Well, what I see is the shape of one lemon and then the shape of a silhouette of three others.
Okay.
That I think are lemons because they look the same, but I'm also seeing repetition in the color palette.
Okay. All right. So you're seeing one item that you identify as a lemon and others that might be silhouettes of the same object, but not necessarily a lemon. And then you pointed out the backgrounds. I think you both pointed out the backgrounds being different colors. All right. What else? What else can we find?
It was interesting looking at the shape of it, honestly. Before I saw the name of the artwork, I almost thought it was sort of closed mouths or lipstick prints, and I found my mind sort of projecting, you know, some of the other elements of that, like somebody had pressed their mouth on this 4 times or something like that. And then after, you know, after reading the label, looking at it, I was like, okay, I can see the lemons now, particularly, of course, that one that was mentioned that is lemon colored, but sort of kind of a transition in my impression of the artwork based on that, particularly the regularity of it, that it wasn't sort of a person doing something 4 times, but it was a replication of the exact same image. I just thought that was interesting.
Okay, all right. So we have a little different initial impression. Instead of seeing right away a lemon, you saw lip prints, and then looking a little bit closer and perhaps aided by the yellow color, the image of the lemon evolved. Okay. Anybody else have any impressions of this or see something else?
Well, with regard to the, oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Sorry, the perils of Zoom, always interrupting somebody. I was just going to say that to me, this reminds me a bit of Andy Warhol's work, just that sort of the notion of taking a single object, something pretty common and everyday, and then replicating it with, you know, different graphic color combinations, and kind of the, you know, the silhouette effect, as another participant mentioned as well. So that just kind of evoked a bit of Warhol for me.
Okay, interesting. All right, so it reminds you of another artist. All right.
Oh, I was just going to say that the sharp contrast and the expected color in the upper right-hand corner of the shape that looks like a lemon, and then the color that looks to my eye like a lemon, and then the contrast of that of the black and yellow below, and then contrast those to the other two on the left-hand side, which is a grayed out background and then a very light background. Gives an interesting look and comparison and contrast to all of them. The right-hand side is much more vibrant, and my eye at least was drawn there immediately. And then I looked to the left. But it's a whole different feel. I mean, if I were going to ask, so when you look at these, how do you feel? I feel very differently about the two on the left than I do about the two on the right.
Okay, because the color has affected your perception and reaction maybe to these four objects with the more vibrant colors, eliciting maybe a more positive response or just a different response.
I'm just wondering, like, if it weren't yellow, if the one in the upper right-hand corner weren't yellow, would we have said lemon at all? Because if you just look at the shape, I mean, it's just kind of an organic blob, but to me, it looks an awful lot like a walnut. So, you know, if the image or if the idea hadn't been implanted in our mind with the one in the upper right, that, you know, the shape being yellow, let's just say that it was brown or something, would we have called this like walnuts? Just how much that color is affecting our reading of the image itself. And for example, if we had some sort of color blindness, would we read it as even the same thing as lemons?
Or like someone said, the red lips.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that's a really interesting thought in terms of like the way we're like perceiving this. Because I don't know if it was just me seeing it on the website, but I think when I looked at it on the website, it was oriented a slightly different way, and some of these
It
like
might
the
have
grayer
been,
ones were on the
might have
on the
been.
right. But I think that this leads more to that almost.
Oh, Ben, you're muted.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. You're still muted.
My cat is still lying on the keyboard. I was just going to kind of agree with that walnut impression, that particularly starting with the sort of that one in the upper left, that leans much more strongly to it. Whereas like if it's rotated and like the lemon is more, the yellow colors are more on that side, where at least my eyes started, it you know, the direction you're going initially shifts. I think that's a really cool, you know, thought.
Let me ask this. Go ahead.
I agree with Billy in it that the colors are more vibrant and striking on the right regarding the shading. I mean, you've got four distinct squares there, and two of them I would call what are lighter on dark. So you have you have a bright one on a dark background, and then you have a dark one on a light background. And when you go to the left, the bottom corner is the darker image and the darker background. They seem to be more washed out or faded on the left, and where the ones on the right, just the contrast of the very dark and the very light kind of bring out this intenseness in them. So
Well, let me ask a question. If do they look to be all the same size as you look at them?
I think my brain is telling me that they're the same size when you look at them individually, but when I sort of take them in together and, you know, maybe squint a little bit, I feel like the yellow shaped lemon in the upper right hand corner feels maybe a little bit bigger, but definitely the color. So the color of the object and then the color surrounding it does sort of affect my perception of relative size.
Yeah.
I expect them to be the same size. I mean,
that was your expectation, right? But I agree with Christy, that yellow one, just something about it has a more of a presence, and it feels a little bit larger, perhaps. Let me ask a question about if you were to see these objects that we're calling lemons or perhaps something else sitting on a bowl on a friend's kitchen table, what would your reaction be as opposed to seeing them here as a piece of artwork?
You mean as I see them right now, as they're presented right now, I would think that three of them are rotting and one of them is right.
Okay. All right. Now, if you were to take those objects and to try to make a drink, let's call it lemonade out of them, would it taste the same as what you're used to lemonade tasting like? If you knew what you were making it.
Well, I wouldn't try to use the 3 black ones. I would
You
just
wouldn't
use
do
the
it.
yellow one.
Okay. All right. Just wouldn't do it. All right. If you didn't already, or you haven't already looked at the label or seen this in person in the museum, how large do you think this artwork is? What would you guess? Billy, you're muted, I think.
I know I've seen this and I don't remember the size that they are. So I'm going to guess that each frame piece would be maybe 36 inches square.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, let's go ahead. Let's take a look at the label. And we will find that this is 4 Lemon Sweet. So I think several of us already had identified that. And it is by Donald Sultan from 2018. And you're pretty close on the size, 39 by 39 inches. So it is a large piece, and it's hung the 4 together with a slight space, if I remember correctly, there's a little bit of space in between. So I'd say the whole thing is over 7 by 7. I don't know, Christy, you might have a better idea, but it is a large presence on the wall. Donald Sultan was born in Asheville, and he received his undergraduate art degree from UNC Chapel Hill and his MFA from the School of the Art Institute in Chicago before establishing himself in New York, where he currently resides. He is known for taking familiar objects such as lemons, other pieces of fruit, flowers, playing cards, industrial sites, and reducing them to simple patterns. And by using bold colors like we see here and simple repetition, he makes us think about the world differently than we usually see it. There's another work of his at the Asheville Art Museum, a sculpture entitled Big Yellow Poppies, and it's up on the museum's rooftop terrace. I have there are a lot of interesting facts about Donald Sultan if you start reading about it, but one that I found sort of fascinating, he collaborated with Neiman Marcus to create a perfume fragrance in a bottle and a special display case that he designed. He insisted that the perfume be called turpentine, and the bottle was actually designed to be an old turpentine can, but made of crystal. And I believe it sold out. It was fairly expensive too. But anyway, that's the story of the 4 Lemon Sweet and a little bit about Donald Sultan. I think I'll go ahead now and turn it over to Ralinda to lead discussion for our second artwork.
While you're doing that, I just wanted to tell you I changed my background so that folks could get a sense of how big it is.
Yeah. Large.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Christy, can we have the next slide, please? All right. As Kay had suggested with her first work, would you all just join me now to spend a quiet moment and just take a look at this artwork? Okay. What do you think is going on in this artwork?
I see repetitive stars in various square patterns, but I'm presuming there's one in every box. But if you do a diagonal, like from the top left corner to the bottom right corner, a number of them, you can't really discern, at least on my screen, the actual star pattern very clearly. It's kind of missing in the white, the black, the orange, the yellow, the blue. It's very undefined, where on some of them, it's exceptionally, you can see the entire star from the inside out. So.
Okay, right. It's, I think if we were to see it in person, it would become more evident that the color on color, so the top left corner, which is the white on white, not so much on the gray on gray, but the black on black and the yellow on yellow particularly, which you had pointed out, do end up looking like they're just solid blocks. So you're right that in adding the star color on top of the background color, it changes our perception of the actual shape in the square. What else can we see?
I think that's interesting, sort of kind of building on that sort of contrast and how it bleeds into them. One of the things I noticed was that the stars aren't fully contained within each square, right? Like the little edges, the edges kind of run out of the maze almost. It's not, could easily just have all fit on that piece of paper, whatever material it is, but they don't. And so they kind of lead one into the next. You can kind of trace your finger from one to the next tile, and then it almost looks like it just kind of spills out into like a pool, right? You can no longer follow the path. You're kind of lost in those solid ones where you can't really see where it's going anymore. So I just thought that was sort of an interesting visual effect. There's that continuity and then that splash of non-continuity.
Okay. Yes, I think that there's the continuity, regularity, pattern, repetition that you've noted. And then the artist has also disrupted our eye somewhat by not containing the star perhaps in the square, so that, as you pointed out, it is leading your eye from one square to the other, as opposed to containing it in each individual square. Anything else that we see?
This,
oh, go ahead.
oh, sorry. I was going to say, this reminds me almost of a quilt, kind of the folk art, the grand American tradition of quilting, where you take the squares of fabric, and oftentimes they're different colors, but they might have a similar pattern. And, those are repeated in many of the kind of traditional quilts. And so that's something that just really struck me, especially the way that the boxes of the stars kind of have the white, it's almost a white grid separating each of them. It's just enough time kind of to give the eye a little place to rest. And for me, at least, it kind of reinforced that quilt feeling.
Right. So the way that this grid pattern, the color shape combination that the artist put together is reminiscent of a quilt pattern, or perhaps a game board or something of that nature. And that kind of gives us a point, perhaps a familiarity for something that we can relate it to a quilt, instead of just as a freestanding piece of art that's hanging on the wall. How many different kinds of repetitions or shapes do you see?
Well, I keep getting drawn to what seems to me to be a focal point, which is the yellow on yellow square lower right hand corner, and the yellow, what I keep interpreting as a yellow axis running down that second column from the right. Yep. That whatever overall pattern with all the rest of the squares, I keep getting, my mind keeps going to, oh, that that's an L there, or that's a break or something. It keeps trying to make something out of that line, out of that column, and particularly that focal point, what seems to me to be a focal point.
Okay, so you're seeing that the square with a color on color perhaps disrupts your view of the rest of the piece, in that you can't discern the pattern in that particular location, and it starts to get you thinking of perhaps other types of combinations, like a letter or some other form in the grid that's laid out by the artist.
Right.
What if the artist had done this piece all in pastels or in pale colors? Would that affect how you feel about it?
Don't know. It's a really good question. I'm trying to envision that.
Yeah.
It has its own logic. There are 6 colors that are used here and none of them blend. So you have white paper, white ink, gray paper, gray ink, black paper, black ink, red paper, red ink, yellow paper, yellow ink, blue paper, blue ink. And each then color has the combination of the other. So in this column here, you have all of the white paper with all the different color inks. Same thing for here, same thing for here. But in this column, or in this row, you have all of the different colors of paper with the white ink. What I love about the 8-pointed star is that it also sort of shows your eye which way to go, because it points you left to right, it points you up and down, and it points you to the 2 diagonals to sort of help your brain to follow the different logic contained therein. What I find really interesting, though, is with the 8-pointed star, I would have almost imagined that the logic would have been that much more reinforced with 8 different colors of paper and 8 different colors of ink, just to keep it very sort of tight within its own logic. So I feel like with using the number 6 actually breaks it down a little bit, but maybe with the number 6, you would have had to have more than an 8-pointed star. I'm not sure.
So Christy is seeing that the choice of the artist to use this particular color combination and limit it to the white, gray, black, red, yellow, and blue does alter the opportunity for variation.
Sort of beautiful mathematic purity.
Before I tell you a little bit about the piece and the artist, I was just going to ask, given everyone seems to find some logic to it, something that they can really grasp onto the piece, whether it's the color or the pattern, or is it a kind of piece that when you leave today that you'll think about or be able to picture in your mind when you're not looking at it?
Yes, very memorable.
Sally?
I think it's memorable also. It's funny because the first piece we looked at, I was very drawn to. I find this piece really disquieting. I don't know why. Maybe because it doesn't repeat in the way I think it should. That it's less restful to me, or because the white is empty. I don't know. There's a lot going on, and I can see the beauty in it, but it's not one that I easily connect with.
Okay.
I find the piece very playful. Like, to me, it seems like it's random in a way when you look at it initially, and you think it's random, and then you really see the series of the colors, and it's like a color study of the 6 different colors in the patterns. But what's also interesting to me, and what makes it a little bit playful and not so solid, is the fact that each one of these squares is a little bit frayed, if you will, on the edges. They're not all uniform. So I find the whole piece kind of playful.
Okay, yeah, so it has some joy and happiness to it. I wish we could continue with this. You all have some great comments. I just want to give you a little glimpse of who this is. Christy, if we could put up the label. This is a 1996 work on paper by the American artist Saul Lewitt, entitled, as you see, 8 Pointed Stars. This makes perfect sense. Each of those 36 colored panels are individually embossed on a handmade paper. So you do get that sort of deckle edge look around each square. Lewitt lived from 1928 to 2007. He was born to a family of Jewish immigrants from Russia. He received his BFA from Syracuse, was drafted into the Army in the Korean War, and there he made posters for the Special Services. Then after the war, he worked in graphic design for 17 magazine and for I.M. Pei's architectural firm, and after hours, he painted. But he really felt in those early days he hadn't found his artistic voice. This was during the time of abstract expressionism, and everyone was focused on personal and emotional expression and exploration of the unconscious, and that's what was ruling the art world. So he took a low-level job in the bookshop of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, And that changed everything, because there he met other young artists also doing sort of low-level jobs at the Museum of Modern Art, and was attracted to a new art movement known as minimalism. As Frank Stella, the minimalist painter, says, you know, what you see is what you see in minimalist art. So they're simple, singular, repeated geometric forms. So it was art having its own reality, not art trying to imitate something else. So Lewitz was very influenced by this and decided to reduce his art to its essentials, to focus just on concepts. And with this, he became one of the founders of the conceptual art movement. And here's what he said about conceptual art. In conceptual art, the idea or concept is the most important aspect of the work. When an artist uses a conceptual form of art, it means that all of the planning and decisions are made beforehand, and the execution is a perfunctory affair. Now, the way that that influences this piece that we see here is that in practical terms, Lewitt probably did not actually make this piece. What Saul Lewitt did is he created the design, and it could be executed by others. I found an example. I don't have an example of for this particular work in our collection, but another example online for another 8 pointed stars. And what Lewitt would provided to whoever was the, shall we say, owner of the piece, read as follows. The instructions they received were, do every possible two-part combination of white, gray, black, red, yellow, blue. Execute in a format of 8-inch squares arranged in a grid pattern beginning at the left corner with white on white. So when you bought a Saul Lewitt piece, you received a document with those instructions. And then you had people, other artists who would actually execute those instructions to create the piece. So every piece was very, very similar, but they were all slightly different because different individuals had actually physically produced it. So not surprisingly, this approach to art created all sorts of issues about, well, what is art? How can you value it? How can you sell intentions? How do you attribute a piece of art? And so the question I asked our registrar at the museum was, did Saul Lewitt actually sign 8 pointed stars that's in the collection? I mean, he didn't actually he did the design, but he didn't actually make it. And the answer is yes. So although there were others who physically produced the work, he did have the attribution for the piece. And as he said, he considered art to be like symphonies that play music by composers and companies that construct buildings designed by architects. It's all art. So now I think we're going to have to race on to our next piece of artwork, Kay.
Okay, I was muted there, but thank you, Ralinda. Let's take just a moment to look at this artwork. Okay, what's going on in this artwork?
I really like this. I like the colors and I like the patterns and the shapes. And Allison said the last one was playful. I even find this one more playful, like sparklers or fireworks. But something that intrigues me is if you take, I guess, the second row from the bottom and you go across leftwise to the third tile, it's connected to the fourth tile, the pattern or the picture. And then if you go above that one, it also looks like that one's connected, and then go above, and then that one's connected, so that the picture is of each tile is continued in certain of the other tiles, which I find very interesting.
Okay, all right, so you're seeing connections from one, not all of them, but in certain tiles there is a connection. Okay, what else? What else can someone tell me about it? What else do you see?
Well, to me, this almost has a very tropical feeling. I think it's partly the very vibrant colors that the artist used, but also a lot of the shapes in the fully colored squares look to me almost like palm fronds of various types. So it gives it, again, as I said, that tropical feeling. And one other thing I think is very interesting is, again, we see kind of, repetitious grid, and there's a lot happening, lots of different colors, lots of shapes, but I really like the way the artist has placed almost what I looks like to me like pom-poms or fireworks, you know, top left and then the middle and then the bottom left, and it's an even spacing, which I think gives a real kind of almost calm to a very otherwise vibrant and almost chaotic piece.
Okay. All right. So you saw some look like these sort of tropical foliage in some of the squares that are more painted. And then tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing in the ones where you described it as pom-poms. What specifically are you seeing in those?
I think for me, it's the way that they kind of have that there's a central point in the middle of each of these. And then I don't know exactly how to describe it, but, you know, all the pieces are kind of coming out from that central point. So to me, that's like a little bit of, you know, the way you make a pom-pom is you kind of start in the middle and go out. But, you know, I think it's really something that's obviously, as all of these are, kind of open to interpretation, because I think someone earlier said fireworks as well. And I definitely see that as well in kind of the roundedness of kind of the fronds in those squares, you know, kind of reminds me of when you go see fireworks and they have the draping quality. So,
okay.
I know.
All right. Do you, when you look at this, does it look two-dimensional, or do you see any depth to it?
It looks three-dimensional to me, and it also looks like it could be a collage.
Okay. What do you see that makes you say that?
The three-dimensional, the pom-poms it all looks like it could have been glued on.
Okay.
And so the pom-poms were made, and they're very playful, but then the connection of the pieces is done so precisely that it's as if they were cut out separately and then applied to another surface.
Okay. All right. So it looked, you're seeing some three-dimensionality in it, and in the way the pom-poms have been applied, perhaps. Tell me, if you would, anybody, what is one word you think of when you look at this artwork?
Explosion.
All right.
Miami.
Miami, all right. A Miami explosion, perhaps.
Joy.
What else? Joy, all right. Okay. So very positive, sort of uplifting is what I'm hearing in some of these. Okay, if the artist had chosen to use different colors, let's say they had decided to do a palette in shades of gray, how would that have affected your interpretation of this?
Would be very different. Part of this is the boldness of the palette.
Okay.
I almost think it would be menacing if it were in shades of like white and gray and black, because it would be things sort of coming towards you, nightmarish, kind of threatening.
Yeah, troublesome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Billy and I are on the same page.
It might have this energy, but not the joy. Something else. Okay. Does this artwork, now someone mentioned Miami, so I'm going to push on that a little bit. When you look at this, does it bring to mind any particular memory for you, either a time or a place?
My silent partner over here says Hawaii.
Hawaii, all right. Maybe a nice vacation or something, all right. Okay.
It almost reminds me of a carnival or like a street fair, or I could almost put those little pom-poms like on a stick, like little pinwheels, and shake them around. And I find that the positioning of those is very interesting, using the corners and every other, I guess, row or column, the way that they're in three in each, but not in the two, not in the second one from the top or the second one from the bottom, but the way the pinwheels are placed is interesting.
Okay, all right.
Ben?
Go ahead. I thought I heard
Go ahead,
something.
Ben.
Oh, sure. I guess less a place in like another type of art, but some of like particularly some of the pom-poms remind me a little of some of Dale Chihuly's glass sculptures. Like at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, there's like a giant sort of like tentacled ball that reminds me a lot of these like pom-poms that are very vibrant, very rich colors. And I found myself kind of thinking of some of the little collage bits as almost like you zoomed in, like a different aspect, looking at the light playing on a like an elaborate organic glass sculpture from different angles. So that's what it keeps making me think of, that kind of artwork.
Okay, all right. Would you go ahead?
I was just going to say, everybody keeps talking about the corner or the pom-poms on the edges, and I keep looking at the images in between, and they really remind me of kaleidoscope, like looking through a kaleidoscope. You know, I keep looking at that kind of bold colors, odd shapes, overlapping. You know, I get that it comes from the pom-pom and all that, and it's kind of a close-up, but when you just kind of look at those, it just reminds me of kaleidoscope.
Okay, good. All right. Do you get a sense of, does this piece have or this artwork have a static feel, or is there movement in it?
I see lots of movement, very dynamic, and it's because partially because of the color contrast and also the all of the diagonals.
Okay, all right. Is there a sense of rhythm, do you think, as you look at it?
I think there's a rhythm and created, you know, you talked about earlier, pattern and I forget what the other one was, but I think the pattern creates the rhythm.
Okay, all right.
I think in terms of the motion, you know, one of the things I found myself originally thinking of was like, if the sort of pom-poms was like a fireworks concept, and like, you know, some of the other ones are like a kid taking a picture of them that aren't focused super well. You know, you're capturing just a little bit of like the burst. Here's part of that angle. And I feel like I could almost see this as like a series of little snapshots as somebody's taking pictures of like a show almost.
Okay, all right.
It could be music. It could be like some sort of symphony.
All right. All right. Well, that's interesting. So you hear a symphony. Anybody else? If this was a piece of music, if this artwork were a piece of music, what piece of music would it be for you?
What is the what's it called? Fireworks? I can't think of who the composer is.
Is it Katy? Are you thinking of the one by Katy Perry?
No, God, no.
That's
No,
not
it's
a symphony.
Kay, I don't know what you're listening to.
Salsa.
no. There's a famous. I can't think of what it is. There's a famous piece for orchestra.
The one that they play like during July 4th during fireworks?
Maybe, I guess so.
Okay, all right.
Famous composer.
I could also see Pomp and Circumstance, like for graduation or something like that.
Okay, all right.
Allison, I think you had one and I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I keep going back to the fact that I feel like it's salsa. Like there's a Latino feeling about this. To me, the pom-poms feel like tops of palm trees. And I don't know, it just seems to me like it's very vibrant, a lot of vibrancy.
Yeah, okay. Interesting.
Micah Jean in the chat said, of the three, she has liked this one best. She feels like it's the most sense of celebration, and that none of the works that y'all chose today were her aesthetic necessarily, but she's coming to appreciate them through our discussion.
All right, good. Okay, well, I guess we need to take a look quickly maybe at the label before we move on here. This is The Joyful Looking Glass, and it's by Dorothy Gillespie from 2001. And just a bit about her. She was born in 1920 in Roanoke, Virginia, and died in Coral Gables, Florida in 2012 at the age of 92. She wanted to be an artist from a very young age, worked as a commercial artist for a while. She also designed restaurants with her husband, and appropriately enough, you can find this artwork on view and our museum's Perspective Cafe. And she is known for pioneering new directions for metal sculpture, and is best known for large-scale, colorfully painted arrangements of, as this one is, cut aluminum strips that radiate or undulate or curl out from surfaces. And some of her works can be described as bursting fireworks or ribbons. She says, I love color, or said, I love color. It goes back to things I saw as a child, a Christmas tree, a ball bouncing, a kite. And she also has said, I think I have tremendous joy. Sometimes I have ecstasy while I'm working. I feel very fortunate to have that. So I think we're seeing that all reflected in this particular artwork. All right, I'm going to turn it over now to Ralinda for our final artwork.
All right, thanks, Kay, and thanks, Christy, for putting up our next slide. So we'll again take just a short time to sit for a moment and look. Okay, so quite different from what we were just seeing previously. What now do you think is going on in this artwork?
It reminds me of those optical illusion pictures you sometimes see at like the Science Museum or something like that, because at first what strikes me is the very graphic vertical lines really narrowly placed together. But then kind of if you sit for a minute and let your eyes unfocus, you then what starts to come to the fore for me is there's the squares within squares of different colors. And then you've also kind of layered in there as well, got these different sized circles. So it's a very visually busy composition, but it's got a lot of layers to it as well, because you kind of have to take the time to sit and really kind of dig into each different layer.
Okay, good. So it's a somewhat busy and complex piece of artwork because of the many vertical lines that we're seeing, as well as one looks longer and one's eyes get adjusted in different ways to the other geometric shapes, which appear circles, squares within squares, that start to reveal themselves the longer that one's looking at the piece. So good. What else can we see?
Thinking of that sort of layered conception, it almost made me think of, you know, those big billboards that rotate between a couple different like advertisements, like and I almost see this as like in a moment of transition, right? That like you're swapping from one image to the next, and you kind of get a little bit of each of them that you see through the slats as it's moving. So I get that really rich sense of like movement and transition in it as well.
Okay, so this is definitely an example of repetition in art where there is movement associated. And in fact, to Elizabeth's comment earlier, is that as you move your eyes, and in fact, if you move your head and your eyes from side to side, you get a little bit of that optical illusion sensation that she was referring to, and also as Ben was speaking to in terms of the billboards that flip and give you different images.
It's really interesting. I just stepped away to get a glass of water, and so I was about 6 feet away, and it's a totally different experience.
How so? Can you tell us about that?
Probably not. When I step away, I see much more prominently the circles. The 3 circles. I see 3 circles. There's a tiny little circle, but the little blue one, the orange one on the left, and a blue one on the right. But yeah, it's a totally different point of view.
So that's thank you for getting that drink of water, because having with this work, and as when I speak in a moment about the artist, having a different perspective where you see the vantage point at which you see a piece of art can change what you see. And as we pointed out earlier, the complexity of this particular one gives much for us to sort of feed our eyes on and to think about from any distance. So thank you. That's a great comment. Let me just ask, as I know we're running short of time here a bit, do you feel like this artwork invites you in or keeps you at arm's length?
Keeps you at arm's length, keeps you out, because you have to get past all of those vertical lines. One way or the other, either by stepping back or by looking past. So yeah, I find it almost like prison-like, that I'm trying to see this artwork through this mask of vertical lines.
Okay, so that the artist has presented a barrier to the viewer, is what you're saying, that doesn't allow you to enter freely. Anyone else see?
I agree. It almost like first hurts my eyes. It's like fuzzy and it hurts my eyes, but then I'm looking and looking and I'm seeing squares and circles and circles and squares and more circles and more squares within each one. And I'm struck by how many different colors there actually are and how many shades of several of the various colors there are, with purples and pinks and whites and greens and oranges and yellows and blues. And I also want to make it into something. Like I want it to be like a fan or a shower curtain or a something, as opposed to just being there. So.
Well, as we talked about earlier, you know, the way that our brains try to make sense of the world is one way is to translate patterns and repetitions into something that makes sense to us so we can kind of cope. And this one challenges that a bit, as you've pointed out, into trying to take all of this and say, where do I look? How do I make sense of all of this? What if you were able to jump inside this image? If you were on the inside looking around, how would it look and feel if you were inside?
I feel like I'd have to dodge some of the moving objects, like the wheels that are turning and things like that. I feel like I'd have to keep an eye out.
Okay, you'd be like in the Charlie Chaplin film when he's in the factory and all of the gears are turning. So would it be a welcoming space? Would it be a lovely, colorful, rainbow-filled experience, or something else?
It feels busy. It feels like if you were to step into it, you'd have to be constantly aware of your surroundings in order not to get run over or hit by something, or I don't know, in some way sort of touched by moving objects.
Dangerous. So again, it's an arm's length kind of piece. And I wish we had more time to talk about it, because it is fascinating, but you'll be interested. I do want to take a minute to explain a little more about this piece, which we cannot see from our vantage point here. But let me just tell you, if you would bring up the label, please, Christy, about the artist and this work. It's a 1965 oil on wood by an Israeli artist, Yaakov Agam, and it's titled Maquette for Coordination. Maquette meaning a small preliminary model used to test forms and ideas. And as you can see, it's a fairly small piece. And frankly, maquette, I had to look up to see what that meant. So if you didn't know, I didn't know either. He was born in Israel in 1928. His father was an Orthodox rabbi and a Hebrew philosopher, and Agam's Jewish heritage came to influence the core concepts of his art. In his words, he says, art expresses the ancient concept of the Jewish people, that time, by definition, cannot be repeated, and it is unexpected. He trained at the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem, then moved to Switzerland in 1949, and then to Paris in 1951, where he met some of the surrealist artists of the time, including Salvador Dali. He continues, believe it or not, to live and work in Paris. He's in his 90s. He's still producing art in a variety of media. And in fact, in 2017, his hometown in Israel built the Yaakov Agam Museum of Art devoted solely to his work. He has work in most of the major museums in the world, has been in many exhibitions, and has been commissioned for a lot of public art for public spaces as well. He's considered one of the founders, back to one of our earlier comments, of the op art and kinetic art movements. So op art, as you may remember, was in the 60s when artists tried to use geometric forms to create optical effects. So you get movement, depth, vibration, and in an attempt to kind of comment on the illusory nature of art and reality. Kinetic art was a movement that began in the 50s, continued into the 80s, although some had earlier have been involved in kinetic art, if you think the Calder mobiles and all earlier in the 20th century. But with Agam and kinetic art, he was experimenting with static artwork. So the movement's not coming from moving parts. The movement's coming from a static piece of art that gives the impression of movement through the use of geometric shapes. So here's why you all get the sense that there's all these vertical lines keeping you out and things are moving. He does use bold colors and shapes, but in 1971, he developed a unique type of printing that combines different series of images on a corrugated surface that only take form as the viewer alters their vantage point. So indeed, like Ben commented, if you were to look at this piece from a different vantage point, it would be like one of those billboards you see on along the expressway. Artwork utilizing this technique, I don't think the billboards are considered this, but artwork is considered an agamograph, which is so named after him. And what he says is that in life, you look at art and it doesn't change, but everything changes and you don't know how it will change. So you have to go beyond the visible. You have to get to the notion that what you can see at any moment can disappear to be replaced by something else. So essentially a agamograph, including the piece we're looking at here, doesn't really come into being without the participation of you, the viewer. You're actively involved in making the images appear. So now, while I've never seen this in person, I really would love to see how the shapes and colors merge and change. The artwork, actually, all those vertical lines that we were talked about actually have a dimension of 7/8 of an inch. And there's color, different images on each side. So it's like doing an accordion where you print on two sides of the fold. So if you look at it from the left side, it has one image picture. If you look at it from the right side, it has a slightly different image. So it has, you get a whole different story as you move. This particular one, as we are seeing only from the front, and it's also useful to know that from the artist's perspective, when you look at something from the front, what you get is harmony. He felt that warm colors and round shapes were feminine. You see examples here. And dark colors and horizontal shapes were masculine. And that when you view them from the front, the masculine and feminine join together in harmony. He also, as Pete pointed out, all the colors, he used the rainbow of colors because he believed that rainbow is a sign from God, that all the different colors tolerate each other in peace and harmony. And then we have beauty when you use all the colors of the rainbow. So if you're interested at all in seeing one of his agamograph, there is a YouTube, you can look at pieces from his museum in Israel where they take you from side to side, and it's really grand fun to see how the image and the colors and all blend in shape. It's fabulous. So, and I think Kay now just wants to have a few closing comments.
Yeah, just wanted to really close it out and to thank everyone for joining us today for Slow Art Friday and giving us some wonderful new perspectives on these artworks. And also, I think I have a better understanding of how repetition plays such an important role in art after looking at all of these and hearing your comments. Any other further comments or questions before we close out?
All right. Well, thank you, Ralinda. Thank you, Kay, for leading today's discussion. You chose some really fun artworks that are some of my favorites to look at in the museum. Like Micah Jean said, they're not necessarily things that I would hang in my house, but I've liked looking at them, but I've especially enjoyed talking about them today and learning more about them, not only from you, but from everyone else's viewpoints and thoughts about them too. So thank you guys for bringing those today. Next week is the 23rd of April, Friday at noon. Our touring docent Hank Bovey will look at 3 works in our current exhibition Meeting the Moon, and the name of his talk is Walking on the Moon, which keeps putting that song in my head, and I cannot get it out ever since we've gotten that exhibition hanging outside my office. So he's got a print, a sculpture, and a ceramic work, and I think it'll be a really great discussion. So come and join us next Friday. The link to register is on our website. Thanks again for coming today, everybody. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon. Take care.